I want to say it was about 10 years ago. I was sitting in my seminary classes right out here just outside of Philadelphia. And one of my professors was reading through kind of Romans, it's just the book Romans, and kind of doing Romans in one shot. And he did something really interesting. He didn't stop and say that the high point of Romans was at chapter 8, where it says, "For I'm convinced that neither life nor death nor powers or principalities nor anything else, and all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus." He went further, and he went to this other passage that culminates, he said, in Romans 11, which says, "God saw that all were disobedient, and so will be merciful to all." And then Paul throws his hands up and says, "Oh, the wonders and mysteries of God, depths beyond knowing, who could ever repay?" But the high point of Romans was actually mercy. Mercy upon all. Now, fast forward a couple years, and I started hearing rumbles or rumors, in some sense, of how different figures from church history also believed that God would be merciful to all. And then I started doing some really interesting things. I took a Google search and went and did a deep dive onto the word all. And I found out that there's this phrase, the restoration of all things. Reconciliation of all things happens too. So does the renewal of all things. But I started paying attention to every time the New Testament says the word all or the phrase all things. Then I came across this. This is an icon of the resurrection, in which Jesus is pulling Adam and Eve out of the grave and trampling over the gates of hell. So I did a deep dive. I decided to read everything for myself, and I went back and read the New Testament straight through in less than a week, and all I did was highlight every single passage that could possibly be pointing towards the renewal, reconciliation, restoration of all things and all people. And I was shocked at how much I had highlighted. So I made this with all those findings. I made this 60-page PDF. It's an ebook, and it's something for which you can try to explore this topic for yourself. Now, what I did was make it kind of autobiographical, but I'd like to share with you some of it. Okay? What if the gospel actually is really good news in every capacity? Is there historical precedent for that? Has the church been saying that for a long time? Why is it that all the previous catechetical schools that spoke Greek talked about the restoration of all things, and why is it that the two Latin-speaking ones didn't? Well, I go through some of the same topics. How do you define the gospel? What does it mean? How can you understand it? How does church history understand it? Was there a different way that the early church thought about all these things? And so I go through some highlighted passages that I came across in the New Testament. Acts, Luke 15, John 12:32. That's a pretty impressive one when you read it in the original Greek. But then also go into who else from church history talked about these things? Irenaeus. What did Augustine of Hippo, Gregory of Nyssa, Julian of Norwich, Fyodor Dostoevsky? So many. I did a deep dive, of course. But throughout all these pages, I also decided to throw in a few more things. Just two appendixes. Throughout church history, there have been a number of ways in which we have understood atonement theories. How do we understand Jesus being crucified? And so I go through a number of them here, as well as their main proponents, but then also I put in here an appendix. And this appendix is probably where the juice is, where at the very end, I went through and put in every single possible verse that I found that I highlighted in my Bible, as well as what does it possibly mean. And so here are all these passages. I'm not going to show all of them. All of these passages in which the restoration of all things is hinted at. And so, really, I make this for someone like you. Maybe you've been asking questions similar to I have been. And maybe you don't know if you have someone that you can talk to about these things. Maybe you're even looking for an Enneagram 5 like myself to do a deep dive on this stuff for you and to compile it into something like this. So if this interests you, please go look at the description in the box, because I think this might help to answer some of your questions, or at best, maybe help you to see that maybe the good news is actually more good than we even thought, and that the early church knew it. Okay? So grace and peace to you. I hope this is helpful to you, and yeah, shoot me an email about what you thought of it. See ya.